following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This episode is the 100th episode of It's Not Therapy. Yay! So I'm going to talk about what I've learned so far on this journey with all of you. Some of it was a surprise. Some of it was strong evidence regarding stuff I already suspected. All of it came from interacting with you, the listeners. Thanks to everybody who has listened. Thanks to everyone who has been messaging to say they love the show. If you want to say you love the show, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Fill out the contact form. Join the mailing list while you're there. That's how most people get a hold of me. Or at Not Therapy Show on socials. I also have to thank our sponsor. It's Not Therapy is proud to be supported by Phases Executive Fitness Studio. Phases is more than just personal training, physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopathy, massage therapy, Pilates, and yoga. For over 25 years, directors Kathy Nielsen and Garrick Nelson and their team have taken functional rehabilitation to another level, incorporating wellness to empower their clients to take control of their own health. Personalized exercise plans, leading-edge nutrition, physical therapy, and personal wellness services that benefit your physical and mental health. It's all here for you at Phase Executive Fitness Center. You can find them in North York by visiting phasesexecfit.com. And they're lovely, lovely people, which helps if you're not a gym rat. It really, really does. They're super supportive. Okay, what I've learned. The first thing I've learned doing this show over the last 2 and a bit years was how much shame factors into our decision makings. When I was growing up, call-in radio was pretty big. We didn't have social media when I was a kid and teenager, and people were less easy to find through the internet. And I was an extremely shy, introverted kid, but I still called into radio stations to request songs. And in terms of talk, I remember listening to Bill Carroll, and I like Sue Johansson's program, The Sunday Night Sex Show, that destigmatized talking about things related to sex and relationships. Things aren't the way they were in the 1990s anymore, and people live in a unique terror of public humiliation, also known as canceling. Very early listeners might remember that this show started off as a call-in format, but after a few weeks, I ditched that, and I never really talked about why. And what I realized is even though there were calls, people weren't being as forthcoming in calls as they were in the written messages. And it was because they were afraid someone was going to hear them and recognize them. Even the people who actually bothered to call in were being, restrained by that. Some people even said to me they were afraid they might get fired for something they said. Yeah, people were afraid they were going to get fired for seeking mental health support. And I think that's a reasonable fear these days, not just because finding a new job can take months. And a lot of people don't have savings or don't have a lot of savings because they're living check to check. The market is tight right now in jobs, and employers are being, let's say, less than supportive. More on that in a bit. But I do think there are some people who say they're worried about getting fired because the truth is more embarrassing. They're just ashamed to talk about their struggles anywhere remotely public. Mockery and bullying have become exceptionally normalized, with threats and harassment even against members of parliament. Or in Canada, for those listening internationally, members of parliament, at an all-time high. But I'm getting ahead of myself on that one too. Short version, all of this adds up to the shame people are already feeling because of unrealistic expectations for themselves. My top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie, stop trying to be perfect, is designed to counteract this, but that's easy to say, harder to implement. People are cruel and tend to punish mistakes more than they encourage us to take calculated risks to improve. That's where the top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion, comes in. Other people may be cruel to you, but you don't have to be cruel to yourself. But shame tells us we do, right? That we don't deserve to have friends or be treated kindly. The people who are nice to us just don't know us well enough that when they get to know us, they'll reject us. That's what shame says. Many of us are raised to believe that cruelty is normal and kindness won't last. But the truth is that cruel people are cruel and kind people are kind. It really is that simple. That stuff is a reflection of them, not what you allegedly did to deserve it. Someone can be angry at you without being cruel about it. There can be consequences for actions that don't feel like extreme punishment. When we're raised in environments that cause us shame, we accept cruelty, which causes more shame, which invites more cruelty, and very smart people get really twisted up. But just because others are cruel to you, again, doesn't mean you have to be cruel to yourself. We learn through mistakes, but we don't learn anything but self-hatred and hatred of others from abuse and mockery. And I don't mean that friendly ribbing that's done in some groups in good fun. That stuff doesn't hurt anybody. And if it is hurting you, say something, because your friends probably don't want you hurt by kibitzing that's supposed to make you feel accepted. You know, if this stuff is secretly bothering you and you don't want to admit it, you may think that it's because you don't want to ruin everybody else's good time, but consider that that's shame talking too. We live in a shame economy, and the happy math numbers aren't adding up. Too many people are not really living because they're spending too much time and energy protecting themselves, not from what they think will realistically happen, but what a part of them is afraid that they deserve. So we hide behind identity categories and fling abuse at other people based on opposing identity categories. We revere people with more money than us, even though they're running from shame as well. Elon Musk making a fool out of himself in so many reasons, and it seems like what unhinged him is his daughter is trans. And, meanwhile, they were on social media this week talking to each other. Donald Trump is going to pieces over being called, of all things, weird. Fascist, racist, sexist, even rapist. Didn't seem to bother him as much as being called weird. And that blew my mind because where I come from, weird's a compliment, or at least just stating fact. But Donald Trump is obviously insecure and sitting on decades of buried narcissistic shame. In Trump's world, if you're a bunch of scary things and people don't like it, well, you're scary, so you're still manly and they're just a bunch of whiners, right? But weird isn't scary. So, he throws his running mate, J.D. Vance, under the bus and is having increasingly frequent meltdowns in an attempt to be scary again, possibly to reassert dominance. Reassert? Reassert. So you don't have to be perfect on this show. Perfect is a lie. Meanwhile, you don't see Kamala Harris saying much at all about the awful things that Trump and company have said about her. He likes to call her stupid lately, which she clearly isn't. And he likes to go after her alleged sexual activity, which, come on, we're getting into the territory of every misogynist out there that, has a woman who doesn't do what he tells her to do. Are his childish taunts frustrating? Of course. I mean, come on. Tampon Tim? How old are these people? But there's an obvious difference between the candidates who are comfortable with themselves and the ones that aren't. This is a good reminder that no matter how rich or successful you are, you cannot outrun shame. Because no matter how fast you run, how high you climb, shame stays with you because it's inside you. The only way to reduce your shame is to be accountable and compassionate with others and yourself. There's no other way to separate making mistakes from being a bad person, no matter what anyone else tells you. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at Not Therapy Show. NotTherapyShow.com is a website. Join the mailing list. Fill out the contact form at Not Therapy Show on X. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. When we come back, I'll tell you the second thing I've learned over the 100 episodes I've done of this show. It has to do with what therapists can't do. You're not going to want to miss this on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still celebrating my 100th episode by examining what I've learned doing this show so far. This episode is still sponsored by Phases Executive Fitness Studio, phasesexecfit.com, for all your fitness and personal wellness needs. Again, that's Phases Executive Fitness Studio, phases like the moon, phasesexecfit.com. Okay, I promised before the break, gonna tell you what therapists can't do, what I've discovered, shockingly, a lot of therapists aren't good at. And some of you may not find this lesson terribly surprising, but here goes. I've discovered that a lot of therapists are not the greatest communicators. And by that, I mean that a lot of therapists have this incredible ability to use a lot of words and say very little of substance. The ones that have more media training are great, but every so often you get one who's very nice and very compassionate and what? Like I said, this might not be at all surprising to some of you. I work with many people as a peer counselor who, my clients feel really disappointed by conventional therapy because the therapists were very nice and seemed to care, but didn't actually give them much that was useful to them in terms of feeling better. Now, part of this is because therapy does specific things. Therapists are trained to be good listeners more than good talkers, but the reason therapy is ineffective for so many people is because what they need isn't something therapy does. They need a support system outside of therapy. The two things are designed to work together. This is what I didn't have when I was in trauma therapy. People around me who knew how to support the therapy process. This is why I decided to become a peer counselor instead of a therapist, because there are lots of good therapists out there, but nowhere near as many people working on people's social environments. I'll talk more about that in the end of the show, but let's face it, a lot of people's families, jobs, and social groups are the primary reason they're stuck in misery. These elements undo a lot of progress made in therapy. Your therapist can't be both your therapist and your therapy support system. They do very different things. Your therapist's job is to make any necessary diagnoses, determine a course of treatment, and challenge you. And that process can be difficult, even exhausting. Your therapist is not your friend, nor can they do the work for you or provide you the emotional support and validation necessary to heal. Never mind that, using a therapist as a surrogate friend is really expensive too. Granted, there are a lot of therapists out there who just let you pay them to listen to you. That's all some people want. The people that I work with aren't satisfied by that. And this shows there are a lot of different therapists out there because there are a lot of different types of people out there. And the range of personalities and specialties I've had on the show over these 100 episodes makes me feel like I'm just scratching the surface of the variety of what's out there. But there are also a lot of scams, new age branded products that promise to solve all your problems without having to do any work or feel any pain type of thing. Almost weekly, I get some email from a publicist, from an energy worker, someone who promises to fix trauma in just a few easy steps. Of course, they won't tell me what those steps are. I even got the Scientologists trying to sneak on the show. Yeah. And if, you heard the word new age and got kind of defensive. No, spirituality is wonderful, okay? It's great. I'm a spiritual person. Again, it's not therapy. Spirituality can be a fantastic supplement. It isn't a substitute for the hard work that happens in therapy. That hard work can often feel like it's breaking us down instead of building us up. And it's really important to have people around you to, tell what Garrick from Phases says: good pain versus bad pain. Okay. I've also had a lot of really questionable stories about what a therapist told someone. And it's not my job to argue with people, but I hear something and say, doesn't sound right. Not the person's lying. It's that, the person didn't listen twice before they talked once. Do therapists make mistakes? Absolutely. But here's an example of a common thing I hear, okay? My therapist told me that this person, say it's me or someone else, a therapist told me that they're abusive, or they're a narcissist, or they have borderline personality, or they're bipolar. And the reason I'm always, a therapist probably didn't say that, because therapists can lose their licenses for saying things like that. That's something you can report them for. A therapist cannot make definitive statements about a condition someone might have that they've never personally worked with. You see that in the media all the time. I have not personally treated this person, but, right? Anyone who sees clients knows that clients filter things through their own lens, and they could very well believe that that's what they heard. And this is why I wish therapists would be a bit more careful sometimes, because what the therapist might have said is that a behavior was abusive, or a person might be narcissistic. I really wish they wouldn't focus on people and only focused on behaviors, because they might be a narcissist. They are a narcissist. A person desperate for some sort of control is not going to see the difference. Either way, a therapist can't diagnose someone by proxy. And if you want to heal, you don't want them doing that. You do want them to help you see that certain behaviors, certain habits are inherently harmful or inherently abusive, but they can't tell that other person's intents, having never spoken to them. Now, that being said, family members, especially parents, can be real good at therapist shopping, and that's how they manipulate couples or families counseling to get a therapist that accidentally helps them perpetuate the abuse that landed the family in family counseling. I've seen a lot of that sort of abuse of the system. But I've also seen therapists get reported by malicious people who just wanted revenge. They didn't actually want to improve their own life. Anybody who's been in practice any length of time has stuff like that. I'll touch on this after the break. We'll get into the malicious people I've encountered in my first 100 episodes after this break on It's Not Therapy. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at Not Therapy Show. NotTherapyShow.com is the website. Fill out the contact form. Join our mailing list while you're there at Not Therapy Show on socials. When we come back, when stuff goes super wrong on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and this episode is still sponsored by Phases Executive Fitness Studio, phasesexecfit.com, for all your fitness and personal wellness needs. Again, that's Phases, like phases of the moon, Executive Fitness Studio, phasesexecfit.com. And we're still talking about what I've learned in my first 100 episodes of this show. And now we're getting to the spicy stuff. What's gone wrong? Well, there have been some disturbing things, like being gaslit and condescended to by one of the senior members of a major trauma center that I tried to get on for an interview. Obviously, I didn't pursue them on that interview. Yikes. And there have been frustrating things, like a lot of the brands that claim to be supportive of mental health. Yeah, they don't actually support initiatives that work. They just want to hang up a shingle and pat themselves on the back. Look, we have our name on something mental health related, right? Then there's an absolute tragic lack of funding for at-scale mental health initiatives. Again, we might get to that in this show later. We might have to save it for another day. But then there's, I say go good crazy. There are bad crazy people. The vengeful people. The truly malicious. They're out there. The media attracts them. And they really don't respect things like freedom of the press or personal boundaries. Top 10 phrase, other people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. Yeah, that's been sorely tested. Remember Poppy and Xena from a while back? The couple that was on the episode about mental health complicating consent? The people with the very harrowing tale of a polyamorous girlfriend gone wrong? If there was ever a case of when someone shows you who you are, they believe them. No, I don't mean Poppy. Poppy's great. Xena's great. The girlfriend, who was not named, on a show about mental health issues complicating consent, not intimate partner abuse. Yeah, her and her friends, you can hear my air quotes over the radio, they didn't react well at all to Poppy and Xena's appearance. In fact, Poppy and Xena's haters not only savagely attacked them for doing my show, they tore apart my life for daring to have Poppy and Xena on as a guest. How bad did it get? It got so bad that Kiwi Farms, the trolling and harassment site best known for making trans women miserable, has people on there talking about me to this day, and it's absolute nonsense. None of it's true. I'm pretty sure that one of the people involved is the woman stalking me, who I affectionately call Stalker Chan. Another Kiwi farmer may actually be a former client. Emphasis on maybe. There's no way to know. It's all anonymous, right? Either way, the disinformation about me and leveled at me for daring to have Poppy and Xena on as guests added a lot of credibility to Poppy and Xena's claims of abuse. Why? Non-abusive people, one, don't seek vengeance on people for being mentally and physically ill. And two, they don't attack someone and commit character assassination because someone gave someone a chance to tell their story when they claimed that they'd been taken advantage of or put in a bad spot. We're supposed to listen, not judge, when victims are telling their stories, remember? Of course, they claim Poppy's lying and that she's truly the abusive one. But if that's so, I've been in that situation. The best thing to do is cut off contact and get on with your lives where she can't hurt you anymore. Nobody said anyone's name. It was all about, was she able to consent? Not any intentional misdeed on the part of the then ex-girlfriend, right? Just everybody get on with their lives. She's got borderline personality disorder. They don't take rejection well. If that's what they believe, just get on with things. That isn't what they did, though. Poppy's trans, and a couple of her ex-partners fed information to unscrupulous YouTubers about Poppy's past, including numerous uses of her dead name, the death of her partner in an accident years ago that I had no idea about when I talked to her, and her struggles raising her partner's child, not her biological child. She assumed responsibility for her late partner's kid. And these spiteful exes managed to turn that into a bad thing because she was grieving, reeling, dealing with being borderline and gender dysphoric, and made a few bad decisions in her personal life. We have to gender swap Scott Pilgrim here for Poppy. The evil ex quotient is off the charts. And Poppy's tendency to pick lousy partners other than Xena is something Poppy and I have discussed off air. Xena is great. Xena's great. Really mature and supportive, possibly to a fault. But these other people, wow. Even if they were right, freedom of the press, baby. In my various jobs in the media, I've been accused of everything in the book, including multiple times being falsely accused of abuse. Specifically, I've been called a narcissistic abuser, a particularly ridiculous claim because with the amount of therapy I've had, they would have caught a personality disorder. In some ways, that would have been a lot easier. There'd be a name to put on what was wrong with me. Because at the time, developmental trauma, even now, we're still learning to understand it. Worse, my problem hasn't been narcissism, historically. It's been the opposite. I was a toxic altruist because my boundaries sucked. Other people don't have to like your boundaries. They do have to respect them. But no matter how frustrated I've gotten with these lies people have told about me over the years, and there's been some really serious shit. They've accused me of crimes, falsely, obviously. Even with all this stuff, I've never sent information to a YouTube bagman who systematically pushed every button Poppy had that could trigger a suicidal ideation while viciously mocking her for having suicidal ideations. That in itself right there is abusive behavior, and anybody who's not abusive would have been, no, not cool. I didn't know he was going to do that. I'm out. I'm sorry. This is over the line. I admit I wasn't entirely sure what to believe when I had Poppy and Xena on the show, which is why I framed it as a mental health and consent issue. Took flap for that, too. She's saying that mentally ill people can't consent. I never said all the time. I said sometimes. And that's true. That's why it's very important to understand and accept when you have a mental health condition. I'm living proof with the PTSD. So in Poppy and Xena's situation, I figured the objective reality of the situation was somewhere in between their story and the ex's story. I don't believe that anymore. Now I'm completely convinced that Poppy is 100% telling the truth regarding her ex's abusive nature, because no one who ever cared about someone participates in that kind of public torture. It doesn't matter what someone you love does to you. Love prevents you from reciprocating in kind. Something's really wrong there. And okay, I knew having Poppy and Xena on was a risk because internet, but also, let's face it, polyamorous transgender lesbian with borderline personality disorder, that, I was aware of the credibility challenge because of mental health stigma in the minds of, I'll say, normies. I knew Poppy had Riz, right? That's charisma for older people. But enough Riz to overcome that, I was really worried about how she'd be received. Now, there's a good side to this, right? Listeners of this program, the rank and file, the people who didn't have a dog in this fight, you guys were great. You were compassionate. You were sympathetic. The messages I got were very supportive. The people going after her have never stopped to think about what they're doing, hounding a borderline person with her traumatic past in an attempt to publicly humiliate her. They even got her fired from the job she had when she did the interview. And the whole problem with this is mentally ill people can't stop being mentally ill just because the mental illness is inconvenient in a relationship. Remember, none of this had to do with Poppy's job. This was all her personal life. Poppy's in ongoing treatment, and the fact that she's still around after everything indicates that treatment is working. Because this stuff with a person with borderline, So I want to thank the listeners specifically for their supportive messages, the people that, reached out to her directly online. That was great too, because somebody with a mental illness, even a personality disorder, I hate the term, but that's what they're called, the fact that the people with these conditions have these conditions, they shouldn't have to disappear into the shadows because of it. On the contrary, letting people know that these conditions are treatable encourages people to do the work. It's very, very important to let people know that you can get treatment for and live with even the most serious diagnosis. Because otherwise people avoid finding out because they think it's, a fate worse than death sentence. Watching the online mob try to burn it all down, though, they even dug up stuff I said and did before I got treatment for PTSD. They went back like 15 years or more. Colluding with the woman stalking me was not beneath them. They went after my friends. One of whom, Asher, the guy who was on the episode about borderline personality disorder, because he also has borderline personality disorder, they tried to frame him as a child abuser because he's a mentally ill gay furry, his words, not mine, who had adverse childhood experiences himself. All of this was using maximum mental health stigma to bully, and it was sickening. But this is the extreme end of the spectrum. But this is what people with mental illness go through when they try not to live in shame, when they are open about their diagnosis, when they are open about what it's like to live with it. People are awful. And of course, some people, when they found out Kiwi Farms was involved, they panicked. Some of them backed away from me. They abandoned me, partially or completely. And I don't hold that against them. It's scary. I get it. But I won't forget it. Not only did this whole episode show how pervasive and normalized mental health stigma is, again, it was a flagrant violation of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. If you think a journalist has been fooled by a canny manipulator, you present counter evidence. You don't attempt a character assassination of the journalist. The fact that Poppy's harassers didn't just paint me as stupid or gullible, they tried to make the case I was evil and dangerous. That was another sign of their mask falling off and bursting into flames. In my opinion, based on what I've observed, they're continuing to abuse Poppy through the system and trying to isolate her by attacking anyone who gives her a hearing. I don't need to know exactly what happened behind closed doors where there's two sides. The public behavior of Poppy's detractors speaks to their motives. They aren't victims. They're acting out of vendetta. The whole thing reads to me as, how dare she? Unfortunately, this isn't the only situation I've had to deal with in the last 100 episodes, though it is the most explosive. Journalists of all sorts are under siege now, and science reporters have it especially rough in the age of the anti-vaxxers. But our laws regarding abuse of anonymous internet accounts are also lagging behind. I believe that people should not be allowed to accuse people of crimes behind anonymous burner accounts. If people just want to goof and meme and be skibbity, be anonymous. That's cool. Like, that's what it's for. Get everything out of your system without, your work and family knowing what a little freak you are. Cool. But when someone crosses the threshold to accusing someone of criminality, someone along the line should know who that person is and be able to verify or disprove certain elements of their story. Now, before you bug out on me on that last comment, let me be clear. I said it before. Victims absolutely have the right to talk about what they survived. They need to talk about what they survived. Naming their abusers on the internet, though, you gotta be careful because it can open them up to fresh abuse. Because again, the whole moral of this story is abusers abuse. And they don't stop until someone with power makes them stop. Take it from me, I've been stalked by the same woman for 13 years. And again, you'll notice I never name her. She's just Stalker Chan. It's my story and her identity isn't relevant to my healing. The whole point of talking about it for a lot of people is to validate that it's real, it happened, it was a big deal, it continues to happen. I continue to believe that the internet, notably social media, isn't the best place to talk about these things because people are just so freaking cruel. There's too much invalidation that happens on social media. People accusing other people of being liars, not just mistaken liars. People are saying they have this cluster B personality disorder based on tweets. Those things are very rare and take a lot of time and observation to actually diagnose. Now, in Poppy's case, what made her situation so interesting to me is she does, in fact, have a cluster B personality disorder and is open about it, right? Thing about it, again, the Riz. Poppy has a lot of Riz, but that disclosure makes it very easy to use stereotypes regarding borderline personality disorder to paint her as the perpetrator instead of the victim of abuse, which is what you see in stories a lot. The statistics don't back it up. People with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of abuse than the perpetrators. That's just, that statistic has been consistent for decades. The fact that Poppy's a therapist was something they also used to attack her, and stigma and information are rampant when it comes to both sides of these mental health discussions. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Why the entire system needs something of a rethink, redefining where the system begins and ends. After our last break on the 100th episode of It's Not Therapy. Questions, comments, any feedback, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Join our mailing list while you're there at Not Therapy on socials. When we come back, why everything we think about the mental health system is kind of wrong on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still celebrating 100 episodes of It's Not Therapy, and I'm talking about what I've learned through that journey. This episode of It's Not Therapy is still brought to you by Phases Executive Fitness Studio, phasesexecfit.com. That's phases like the phases of the moon, phasesexecfit.com. Now, before the break, I promised to talk about the problems with the way people think about the mental health system. What I've learned over the past 2 years is the way we think about the system is all wrong. I've touched on this in pieces throughout the show. I'm going to recap. I and many others subscribe to the biopsychosocial model of mental health. It's considered the best practice model we have to work with now. What that means is biological. Psychiatrists handle the medication that balances out biology. Then we've got psycho. Psychologists and registered therapists handle the talk therapy psychological aspects of the model. And both of those can be done very, very well, and people's social environments are still complete wrecks. And the two other parts, the bio and the psycho portions of the model, are severely overloaded because the social model doesn't get enough attention. That last third is just a hot mess. It's skibbity. I love that word. Okay. Think about what happens when someone's struggling. They're told to go to therapy. Okay, maybe that is the right move, but therapy is going to tell them that stuff in their life needs to change. And then they come back to the people who told them to go to therapy and get a ton of resistance regarding the healthy changes they need to make. We've got this good vibes only thing in culture, and it's nonsense. Good vibes only people are just telling you they don't care when things are tough for you. Top 10 phrase, ignoring negatives isn't being positive. Identifying things that need to change and changing them is the best, fastest, and cheapest way to improve your mental health. I believe that going into this show. I believe it even stronger now. Again, I spent a year in trauma therapy fighting the acceptance that nearly my entire life had to change because it was all extremely bad for me. I was a supporting character in my own life, and I knew it. I just didn't think I could change it. I was wrong. It just involved a complete change in the way I viewed, well, everything. And this is where the top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's, came from. Not only did I have to start making real choices regarding my own life, I had to stop trying to save people from their own bad choices. That meant having people around me with the same core values, not just the same common interests. That's the origin of the top 10 phrase. Core values are more important for relationships than common interests. It also meant learning that, I say this a lot, healthy goals are based on things you can control. Top 10 phrase. We're given the impression that achievements make us happy. They don't. Achievements make us excited. They give us status. But many high-achieving people are deeply unhappy because they set goals that even their significant achievements can't meet. A lot of parents are pushing unhealthy goals on their children, especially adult children currently working for work. Weekly, I hear from someone whose parents insist they can just go down to a local business, hand them their resume, and ask for a job in person. No, parents. Most companies require the resume to go through their central computer systems. And privately owned and operated businesses rarely have the money to pay any additional staff right now, unless you know something we don't. If you got an inside tip, great. But otherwise, you're not helping with this advice. It's really just bullying your kid into doing something humiliating. If you really want to help, pay for the resume analysis that uses the same computer program your employers do. Your kid feels bad enough about not having a job. Trust me, I talk to them. You're not helping by making them feel worse. They know. Many people go through life with a lot of people talking and no one listening. They don't know how to respect and set boundaries to save their lives. And people go to therapy to learn how to do this. And it's not a cost-effective way. There's better ways. Just don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. You know I'm going to use every top 10 phrase in the show, right? Right. There's a lot of mental health stuff that doesn't need a therapist, the same way you don't go to your doctor to eat right and exercise. Ideally, this mental health nutrition is taught and supported in the communities a person is a part of, taking that extra burden off the overloaded mental health system. This is the best, fastest, cheapest way we've got. We know it works. There's just no funding for it. So instead, people have therapists, but they don't really have friends. Everyone's a competitor these days instead of being on the same team. The medicalized mental health system can't solve this problem. It wasn't built to solve this problem. To fix the system, every school, club, business, place of work, and friend group has to be a place where mental health matters. It means not overstressing, overworking, and overextending people. It means not just giving lip service to mental health. It means compassion is a job skill. And it means listening twice before you talk once. No amount of medication or talk therapy in a world can override a support system that isn't supporting you. I talked about this earlier. Again, reasonable expectations matter, but there's so much abuse out there that it's become normalized. Which is why I don't talk about being sane. I talk about going good crazy. Because trying to be sane was the absolute worst choice I'd ever made. Okay, maybe that's hyperbolic, but hear me out. Thinking I could do a mental health show? I mean, that's nuts, right? I'm not a therapist. Who does that? Well, somebody who names the show It's Not Therapy. Every great idea starts as a potentially insane one. Sanity suggests normalcy, but a lot of people's normal isn't healthy. If you're struggling with your mental health, guess what? Your normal is probably hurting you. The mental health system needs our support. It's at the breaking point, and it starts with all of us listening better to each other instead of just reacting to what we're afraid the other person is thinking. A therapist can only work with the information you give them. So if you go in and tell them that your family wants you dead because they said they didn't like something you did, well, that's not going to get you very effective therapy. It's not fair to treat therapists like they're psychics, gods, or miracle workers. They're highly trained people. Most of them do know what they're doing, but they can't do the work for you. They can't get you out of that abusive family, bad friendship, or that relationship that's draining your spirit. They can't do the internal work to set better habits. Only you can do that. You can also tell the people who do help lift you up how much they matter to you. There's not enough of that in the world, and that's what someone might need more than a session with a counselor. Questions, comments, concerns, let me hear it. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Join our mailing list, fill out the contact form. Not Therapy Show on social media. And thank you to Phase Executive Fitness Center, phasesexecfit.com, for supporting this 100th episode of the podcast. And I leave you with our final top 10 phrase. You know it. Normal might be hurting you, but your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you soon.